In 1990, humanity launched the most powerful telescope ever built. 6 weeks later, engineers discovered it could not see clearly. It was blind. The Hubble Space Telescope had taken more than a decade to build and cost roughly $1.5 billion. It rode to orbit inside the cargo bay of the Space Shuttle Discovery on the 24th of April, 1990. Above the atmosphere, there is no shimmer, no blur, no turbulence. A telescope up here should see the universe perfectly sharp. That was the promise. Above the air, Hubble would look deeper into the universe and further back in time than anything before it. Astronauts lifted it out with the shuttle's robotic arm and released it into sunlight, 380 miles above Earth. Its heart was a mirror 2.4 meters wide, polished for years until it was one of the smoothest objects ever made. Everything depended on that curve. If the shape was right, starlight from billions of years ago would land in a single perfect point. In June, the first test images came down from orbit. Astronomers gathered around the screens, waiting to see the sharpest stars in history. What appeared instead was a smear. Every star wore a soft halo, as if the picture had been taken through a smudged window. The telescope focused, but not all of the light arrived together. The center of the mirror and its edge disagreed about where the image should be. The flaw had a name: spherical aberration. Only about 15% of a star's light was reaching the core of the image. For faint, distant objects, that missing light is everything. The deepest observations, the ones Hubble was built for, were exactly the ones it could no longer make. The mirror was not cracked or damaged or dirty. It was ground too flat at the outer edge by about 2 micrometers. 2 micrometers. Roughly 1/50th the width of a human hair. Small enough to be invisible, large enough to ruin everything. The error came from the machine used to test the mirror while it was being polished, a device called a null corrector. One of its optical elements sat slightly out of position. The test said the mirror was perfect, so the mirror was polished to be wrong. It had been measured with extraordinary precision against the wrong standard for years, and nobody caught it before launch. The reaction on the ground was brutal. Newspapers called it a technological turkey. Cartoonists drew the telescope wearing spectacles. For a program built on public money and public wonder, this was the worst possible failure. And it was orbiting overhead every 90 minutes. But the flaw had one redeeming quality. It was consistent. The mirror was wrong in a way that could be described by a single number. Investigators traced the problem back through the records and found earlier tests that had disagreed. Those results had been dismissed as faults in the testing. And anything you can describe exactly, you can cancel out. If the light arrives distorted, you can build optics that distort it back. Engineers designed a corrective package about the size of a telephone booth, carrying 10 small mirrors on motorized arms. Each mirror was shaped with the mirror image of Hubble's error and had to be positioned in orbit to within a fraction of a millimeter. A new camera was built as well, with the correction ground directly into its own optics, so it could see clearly on its own. None of it mattered unless people could fly up there and install it by hand, inside a spacesuit, in vacuum. Inside a giant water tank, the crew rehearsed every movement hundreds of times on a full-size model of the telescope. In December 1993, the shuttle Endeavour launched with 7 astronauts, and the most complex servicing mission ever attempted. They caught the telescope with a robotic arm and locked it upright in the cargo bay, a school bus of glass and aluminium. Then they went outside. 5 spacewalks across 5 days, more than 30 hours of work in gloves as stiff as a car tire. Inside, the payload bay tools floated on tethers, and every movement had to be slow, deliberate, and completely rehearsed. They removed instruments the size of a piano, guided them past delicate surfaces, and slid the replacements into their rails with millimeters to spare. Every screw, every connector, every latch had to work. There was no second telescope, and no way to bring this one home. On the final spacewalk, they closed the doors and released Hubble back into orbit. Then everyone waited. The first corrected images arrived in January 1994. The halo was gone. The stars were points again. The galaxy that had been a soft blur resolved into a spiral, with individual stars scattered across its arms. The telescope that had been a national embarrassment became the most productive observatory in the history of astronomy. A year later, it stared at an almost empty patch of sky for 10 days and found thousands of galaxies where there had seemed to be nothing. The lesson was never that the mistake was small. It was that a mistake, understood completely, can be undone. Hubble is still working today, more than 30 years after it launched blind. If these stories are worth your time, subscribe.